This is why retention is important, because it literally affects how fast you as a barber become fully booked. So if your goal as a barber and as a barbershop owner is to become fully booked one day, retention is how you do it. And based on the math that I did for my barbershop, this is roughly what you can expect for how long it's going to take you to get fully booked as a barber. Now, the exact time might vary because it depends on how long you take on a haircut, how many hours you work per week, but this is true for my shop for sure. And really, I'm making this video right now for my team because retention is one of the things that is directly tied to whether my team makes more or not. So I'm making this video for them, but I figured I would just make it public because I know it can help some of you guys too. But if you want to get fully booked as a barber, focusing on retention is one of the ways that you do that. If you never want to need new clients again, retention is how you do that. If you want to make more money with less clients, retention is how you do that. So let's talk about what retention is, because if you've ever wondered why some barbers can get completely booked out while others are cutting hair for years and still have empty chairs, empty times, that is a retention problem, right? It has nothing to do with how good you can cut hair. It has nothing to do with the clippers on your station. It has nothing to do with the barbershop owner. Is you are seeing clients. In my case, the barbers at my shop are seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 clients every single month. So it doesn't take that many clients for you to become fully booked. Now, the exact number of clients that it takes for you to be fully booked depends on how many haircuts you can do per hour and how many hours you work per week. But from the math that I've done in my shop, you just need about 300 regulars, right? And you'll see that at my shop in a matter of 2 to 3 months. So in theory, a new barber that starts in my shop can become fully booked without the need for any new clients in just a few months. And I have seen that happen, but it is extremely rare because a lot of barbers think that the thing that's going to get them fully booked is doing the perfect fade. And in my experience, that has very little to do with how well you retain clients. And retention is also, because I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds of barbers at this point, or barbershop owners, it's one of those numbers that when I ask people, I can almost bet that they don't know what it is, right? I don't think you can run your business, I don't think you can run your barbershop without knowing your retention. It's like having a car with no gauges on the dashboard. You don't know how fast you're going. You don't know how much fuel you got left. You don't know how hot your engine's burning. Imagine having a car with no gauges. It's kind of like running a business without knowing your numbers. And I made this mistake too for the first 5 years that I was in business. I had no idea what my client retention was, right? So this is why I don't want you guys to make the same mistake as me. Learn what your retention is. You have to have a software that can do this. If your software doesn't track retention, then I would strongly recommend that you switch to a different one that does, because it's one of the most important numbers that helps you determine how fast your business will grow. If you don't know what your retention is, then you are just flying blind. Okay, so what it is basically it just the percentage of people who sit in your chair and pay for a haircut that actually decide to come back. Super simple. And then we're going to define it even further as far as exactly how we measure it at our shop. But that's basically what it measures. How many people did you see? How many came back? Period. The only other variables in that is like, how do you define that time window? And we're going to get into that later, right? But I'm going to break down to you exactly what client retention is, the math behind it, how much more money you can make as a barbershop owner if you improve it, and then how we track it and how you can influence it. So that's what we're going to cover today, okay? So this is why it's important, okay? Because if you have low retention, that means you're kind of like running on a treadmill. So you're working super hard, right? You're cutting hair all day, but you're not making any progress. You're not going anywhere, right? So that's what it feels like when you have low retention. Another analogy you can think about is if you have a bucket, right, with holes in it. So you're going to always lose clients over time. Even my best barbers lose clients, but my best barbers lose less clients. So if you want to get fully booked, then you have to figure out how to stop that. How do we keep more clients coming back? So let me show you a quick math example, right? So let's say you charge $50 for a haircut. That's right now our price. And you have a regular client that comes in once a month. So 12 times a year. That means that client is worth $600. And let's say at our shop, for example, you're getting 100 new clients every single month, which is actually quite realistic. At 50% retention, which is bad, but 50 of those clients come back the next month. So if you keep doing that, every month you get 100 and then you lose 50, but you gain 50, you're not really making any progress at that number. So that ends up being about 30,000 a year, right? But if you're at 80% retention, and so that means you're keeping 80 of those clients, 80 out of those 100. That's 48,000 a year, right? So you can increase your retention, you can increase your income simply by influencing this number, right? And this is without getting any new clients, without spending any money on marketing. You're just keeping more of the people coming back. And this keeps compounding because once, like this says, like once you get past a certain number, it starts to compound really fast, right? Because every single month you're getting new clients. This is assuming that you're doing marketing, right? So if you're always getting a ton of clients coming in the door, the real game is then just keeping more of them, right? So at my shop, you don't have to worry about marketing yourself. I got you, right? All you got to do, the barber at my shop has one job, and that is to get the clients to come back. All right, we're going to talk about exactly what that means in detail, but that's really it. But if you're independent, right, or if you're a barbershop owner, then you have to worry about both sides of that equation, right? You have to worry about getting clients in the door and then having barbers that understand this and that are actively working on getting their clients to come back. So let's talk about how we measure it. So first of all, we use a software. One of the reasons why I changed my software was specifically so that I could track retention, right? So I looked at almost every software on the market, and there's some good ones out there, but I ended up going with Zenati, right? Because you can't improve what you can't track, and Zenati tracks a lot of stuff, right? But retention was one of the main numbers that I cared about. And then as far as how we measure it goes, so if a new or repeat client comes back within 90 days to any barber at that location, they are a retained client. We would consider that a retained client. So 90 days, we came up with that. I tried to go shorter, right? Because you can make the argument that like, most guys get their haircut once a month. That's not true at our shop. At our shop, the average is like 6 weeks, right? And I tried to go shorter than 90 days. And that number changed a lot. So I noticed that after 90 days, though, that number didn't really change that much. So 90 days was the shortest that I could look at where I could consider this number accurate. But that means there's a huge delay, right? So like, for example, we're in April right now when I'm recording this. We are still waiting on January's retention to become accurate. I'm going to consider it accurate once we get into May. But you basically have to wait for that month to be over, plus another 90 days. So basically you have to wait 4 months at my shop to learn what your retention is and to have any confidence in that number. All right, so this is a big unlock for me because when I first started tracking retention, I was looking at it too soon. I didn't realize that you have to wait for it to become accurate. Now, it depends on your window. You can go shorter than 90 days if you want to at your shop. But at my shop, we do 90 days. And the only time we look at it sooner than that is to kind of let the barbers know, like, hey, you still have time to influence this, right? So like I just did that like last week. I shared our January retention numbers with the team to let them know, like, hey, you guys still have another week to call those clients that haven't been back since January and try to get them in before the end of the month so that you can boost your retention. We call that dialing for dollars. Like if you have a client you haven't seen in a while and you want them to come back, get on the phone, text them, email them, call them, right? And try to get them back within that retention window, and that's going to boost your retention. Now, if they don't come back to at all, or they go to a different location, that would count as a lost client, right? And you might hear this referred to as churn. So a lot of barbers think about how many clients am I retaining, but the other side of that equation is how many clients you lost. So how many clients churned. And that's a bad number, right? We want that number to be as small as possible, because the more every client you lose is now a new client that you have to go find, right? And I think this is why a lot of barbers that go into suites end up failing, is because, first of all, a lot of the clients that aren't going to follow you, or a good chunk of clients aren't going to, it depends on your retention, but a good chunk of your clients aren't going to follow you to your suite. And then once you're there, right, then you got to start to think about, how do I replace the ones that are naturally churning out over time? Because if you don't have a marketing machine to replace the clients you're losing, then eventually you're gonna end up worse than before, and you're gonna end up back in the barbershop, right? Because you never solved that problem of learning how to market yourself. But at my shop, the barbers don't have to worry about marketing themselves. Like, I got them. The only thing I got to do is get those clients to keep coming back. And this is how we break it down too. So, because we don't just look at like one number. So there's actually different types of retention. There's new client retention. So how many people this is their first visit ever to the shop. How many came back? And this is usually the hardest one to influence, right? New clients, for whatever reason, are just hardest to get to come back. And, sometimes it has nothing to do with you as a barber, right? It could have been like they were just in town visiting, or their normal barber was just too busy for them that day, so you were the backup, right? So sometimes this for a lot of reasons, new client retention is normally the hardest to boost, which is why for a while actually I ignored new client retention, and we exclusively focused on repeat, which is just, this was somebody who's already been coming here. Did they come back, right? And so this number should be high, right? Because as a barber working at a barbershop, your repeat client retention should already be high. It should be high by default, because all you got to do is just meet the same expectation as the barber that cut the hair last time, that probably works right next to you, right? So new clients, much, much harder to retain, because that's their first ever experience in your shop. But I also think that new client retention is the biggest compliment, or biggest, I'm trying to think of the word, but if you think about it, like that was their first ever experience in your barbershop, was in your chair. So if they come back, that's because of you, right? And if they don't come back, that's because of you, unless it's one of those factors like they don't live there. So I think new client retention is the biggest indicator for you personally as a barber, right? Because if your new client retention is high, to me, looking at that as a barbershop owner, that means that probably your repeat client retention is going to be high, because new clients are much harder to retain. So if you have high new client retention and you're treating repeat clients the same way, then you're probably going to build really fast, right? That's what I've seen in my shop. And so you can learn a lot from just those two numbers, right? If somebody has really, really high new client retention, that usually translates to high repeat client retention, although that's not always the case. Because if somebody has really high new client retention, if a barber has really high new client retention, but their repeat client retention isn't that high, then to me that's a signal that there's some inconsistency there. There's something, it wasn't the same, right? So that new client, they came back, right? And then they didn't come back after they came back that second time. So that means that there was something that was not right. Like, they loved it the first time because they came back and spent money with you again, but they didn't come back after that. So when these numbers aren't in line with each other, like somebody has really high new client retention and low repeat, or really low new client retention and really high repeat, to me, that's an indication that there's some inconsistency, right? I think there's no reason why everybody shouldn't have repeat high repeat client retention, because literally all you got to do is just meet the same expectations as the last time, right? So repeats should be a lot easier to retain. And then total new client retention is one of the things that we look at as well, which is basically just a blend of both, right? Because I used to focus exclusively on repeat client retention, like I mentioned, but I realized that we were just completely ignoring this, and I think this is the opportunity, right? Like your repeats, as long as you don't mess up, like they're going to keep coming back, right? So the new client retention, especially if you're trying to like aggressively grow your shop, if you're spending money on ads, the new client retention is the opportunity, right? It's usually a lot lower than the repeat. So you want to try to influence this number. And I think I remember hearing somewhere that it takes about 3 visits for somebody to become a long-term client. So you want to try to design a system to try to get somebody who's new to visit your shop 3 times. And after that, you probably have a good client for life if you can pull that off, right? So total client retention is a measure of both. It's like a blend of both. So that's what we actually look at now. When we're judging a barber's performance, we keep these numbers in mind to kind of diagnose what the problem could be. But this is the ultimate number that I care about, is total client retention. Because that's overall, like your overall performance as a barber. And to me, that's the biggest compliment, right? Because somebody could leave you a perfect 5-star feedback on Google, Yelp, whatever. They could take a picture and tag you on social media, right? But if they didn't come back, were they actually that happy? So I'd rather have a client come back and see us again and do it for years and never write us a review, right? So I think retention is the ultimate indicator of how good you are as a barber. You got a client to come in and come back again and again, right? It doesn't matter how good you think you are at fades. If your retention isn't high, then there's a problem, right? They don't want to come back. So your fades might be good, but it's the overall experience, which I'll talk about in a second. So let's talk about what's average. Like, what are some benchmarks? So this is the kind of stuff that I like to know. Let's talk about what's average, what's good, and what's considered like elite, right? Elite level retention based on like what I've seen in my shop. So if you see here this Instagram or infographic, this visual, right? I think if you're at 50% or less, I mean, you got a lot of work to do. You're never gonna build, right? Because if you think about it, like you're losing half your clients. So even at 50, you're never gonna make any progress. So you gotta get above 50 to even start seeing progress. And even at 60%, it's going to take you several years to build. So if you want to speed that timeline up, you want to get your retention as high as possible. So what is considered good at my shop? So average, like industry average, would be like 50 to 60%, right? So you're not really making a lot of progress. Maybe you are, but it's going to take you a long time to build, right? So that would be like average, right? And I would say that's probably like industry average. Now, if you're good, I would say you're probably between 70 and 80%. I mean, you're starting to have some traction now. You're starting to have like most of the people on your schedule are repeats. They are requests, and I think if you stay here, even if you never get any better, you'll probably be fully booked within a year, right? Because you're seeing, in our case, 100 to 200 new clients every single month, and you're keeping the majority of them. So you're gonna end up being fully booked at some point, right? I can't say exactly when, but you're gonna be fully booked, right? If you stay just at 70 and 80%. Right? Now, elite level retention, which I have seen barbers get to this point. We have multiple barbers right now at this point in my shop. So that's like 90% or above. I mean, you're just at this point, you're not really meeting a lot of new clients because they can't book with you. If they do book with you, it's because they planned it way in advance or you had a cancellation last second, right? So the barbers at my shop that are retaining a 90% or more of their clients, they don't need new clients. They don't need walk-ins, right? These are the barbers that are on their feet cutting hair all day and barely have time to go to the bathroom, right? Because they're booked, like, and you are going to be, they stay booked, right? Once you get to 90% retention, if you could just hold that, right, then you will always be busy, always. And at this point, if you're an independent barber, or if you get to your barbershop to this point, I mean, you are more than ready to raise your prices, right? You can probably raise your prices a lot at that point and still not lose a lot of clients, because you've basically won the game, right? So every barber's goal should be to get to 90+% retention. 9 out of every 10 clients you meet are coming back, and at that point, you still need marketing, but you don't have to do nearly as much, because you're only losing 1 out of every 10 clients. So if you're keeping 90% of your clients at my shop, if you're seeing 100 clients a month, then we only need to replace 10, the 10 that you lost, right? And those 10 that you lost could have been just people moving, right? That happens. But yeah, versus like somebody at 50% retention, now I have to go find 50 clients next month. So that's a lot harder to do versus 10. So you can see why like retention like lifts everything else in the business, because if I have barbers with high retention, I don't need to spend nearly as much time, effort, and money on marketing, because we're keeping the clients coming back. Really, at that point, I need to shift my effort to hiring because we don't have room for new clients. So here's, I'm going to probably do a whole course on retention. And I have like longer videos on my YouTube channel about this, but let's just talk quickly about how you can influence it. I think there's actually like 4 pillars that go into retention. So let's talk about that based on my experience. So the first pillar is skill. Probably obvious, right? But like this is the baseline, right? Like this is the first thing you have to have if you have to have any hope in building your retention, because you don't have to be the best in the world. You don't have to be the best in your city. You don't have to be the best in your shop, but you have to, if we're rating your haircuts from 0 being the worst haircut I've ever seen, you shouldn't even be cutting dog's hair, to a 10 being like, you're better than the best barbers on Instagram and the best barbers on doing the hair shows and stuff, I would say you have to be at least a 5 or maybe a 6. No, 5. I would say you could be at a 5 and have 90% retention, right? The barbers at my shop that have 90+% retention aren't always the most skilled, but you do have to have a baseline of skill. So I think you got to be at like a 5. And then that's good enough. And these other things start to become more important. Will getting more skilled in cutting hair help? Yes. But I think that it's just one piece of the puzzle. If you just focus on that, but you ignore these other ones, then you're probably not going to get to that point of elite level retention. The next one is consistency, right? So a lot of barbers don't think about consistency, right? They're thinking about making that haircut perfect. And then when the client comes back, they get a completely different haircut the next time. So this is why sometimes you can see barbers that have really high new client retention, but their repeat client retention isn't that great. And that's because they gave that new client an amazing haircut, an amazing experience the first time. But when they came back and they wanted the same exact thing, it was a completely different haircut the second time. So consistency matters just as much, if not more, than a quality haircut. And I know this because I've literally asked clients this, and I said, would you take a slightly less good haircut, but it was the same every time? Every single person said yes. So one way you can ensure consistency, taking notes, saving the notes to the client's profile, and then use the notes when they come back. And then you use the same tools and use the same system. Like if you're not doing that, then no wonder the haircut's coming out different every time. So take notes, use the same tools, use the same system, and you will be a lot more consistent as a barber. Also, like consistency is part of, show up on time, right? Don't change your schedule a lot. Don't move locations, unless you have to, right? So all that goes into consistency. You know, the next thing is professionalism. So taking your haircuts back on time, I think, is something that's so underrated in our industry. And if you're wondering why your retention is low, I would start here, right? Or think about this, because many barbers think that like a good haircut makes up for taking your appointment back an hour later than it was supposed to. It doesn't, right? You have to respect the client's time. So I run behind. Everybody runs behind every now and then, but it can't be a habit, and it certainly can't be like half an hour past their haircut time every single time, because at that point you are being consistent, but you're being consistently bad, right? You want to be consistently on time. So most of the time you're running on time. At worst, it's a few minutes behind, right? So a lot of barbers don't believe me when I say this, but like starting and finishing your appointments on time is a huge factor, and one of the things that almost all my barbers that have high retention have in common, and probably one of the most overlooked things. Like, you think because you have to be in the barbershop all day that the clients don't mind waiting an hour, but they have other things to do, right? So it's part of the whole experience, right? A haircut is just part of the experience, but it's everything that happened before and after the haircut that also influences whether a client decides to come back or not, including whether you took them back on time. So keep that in mind. And the last thing is the connection, right? So this is one of the hardest things, I think, for barbers to learn, because a lot of barbers can't cut and talk at the same time. But I can tell you, I think this is probably the most powerful, right? Because it could even make up, if you really get good at this, it could even make up for all these other things, right? If you can just build a connection with your clients, they might forgive you for the fact that you ran 30 minutes past. They might forgive you for the fact that it wasn't the exact same haircut last time. And if you're really, really good, I mean, they might forgive you for the fact that like it wasn't even that good of a haircut, but you did such a good job connecting with them that they're willing to give you another try. I mean, that was the case when I first started cutting hair. I was terrible, right? But, I tried to build a connection with these guys, and I know some of them were happy with their haircut, but they were willing to give me another chance because they saw that I genuinely cared and I was trying to build a relationship with them. So get to know your clients, build that rapport, and you can also use notes to help you with this, because it might be hard for you to remember every details about every single person, but you can get to know them and put some of that into their notes so that you can just pick up the conversation the next time you see that guy. Right? And it's also harder to leave a barber than it is to leave a barbershop. So you want to have a connection with your clients, so that way they stay loyal. In other words, right? So these are the 4 things that I think go into influencing retention. So skill, consistency, professionalism, and connection. So you want to put all those together. And then some tactics that you can use to help influence your retention are things like rebooking, right? So get them to book their next appointment before they leave. Retail also helps with retention if you give them something that is actually good for their hair. And then the memberships. So I talk about memberships a lot because it was a game changer for our retention. So if you have a membership program, try to get them on membership. That way they're for sure going to come back, right? Because they're paying for it. So all of those things work together to help influence your retention. Now, finally, I just wanted to say, like, retention by itself is one of the most important numbers in your business, but it's not enough, right? You could have elite level retention and still be broke, right? Because imagine that you had like 2 clients and you had the same 2 clients come back every single month for years. In theory, that means you have 100% retention. But is that enough to pay your bills and keep your business open? Probably not. So there's another factor, right? And it's something called utilization, right? Because running your barbershop on just one number is like driving a car with only one gauge on the dashboard. You need to know more than just one number, right? A lot of barbershop owners only look at sales. It's the equivalent of like going to the doctor and all they do is have you step on the scale, and then they say you're healthy. You need to know more information than that, right? Sales is not enough. It's one of the numbers that you need to know and keep track of, but you also need to know your retention, and you also need to know your utilization. So if you want to know more about exactly what utilization is and how you can influence it, then I want you to check out this video right here, because you're going to learn all about retention and how you can influence it. And that, combined with solid client retention, is the secret to building a successful barbershop.